Good morning.
Morning.
Good to be with you on this now March morning. It's our second weekend of March already.
Yeah.
Wow. Easter will be here soon. So, following the series, we're actually one of the accounts may be very familiar to us, the feeding of the 5,000, but this is according to John's account of it, which we don't normally hear. And then we're also going to go into the book of Exodus that tends to refers to the providing of manna and quail that normally is heard during the Pentecost season and so forth. But we've got them in this season of Lent, which is both of these are about God's provisioning for us. And with we're heading to the cross and so forth, it's all a part of the overall provision of God of not just saving us from our sins, but providing us with the bread of life as well. So with that, let's begin with our collect of the day. We pray. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, your mercies are new every morning, and though we deserve only punishment, you receive us as your children and provide for all our needs of body and soul. Grant that we may heartily acknowledge your merciful goodness, give thanks for all your benefits, and serve you in willing obedience through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. And this is an interesting one, especially in light of the grumbling, or the term murmuring, that we hear the Israelites doing as they are in the wilderness now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and the mercies are new every morning, kind of like the manna was there every morning. So that's
Yeah.
Well.
So we're in Exodus 16. We pick up with verse 2. As we get ready to read this, it is an interesting thing. It is referred to what is known or was titled the wilderness of sin. I find that an interesting thing because it's the beginning of the murmurings during their exile or their time in the wilderness wanderings, because they refuse to live by faith. Now they have to live not so much by faith, but by the awareness that everything comes from the hand of God. So we pick up verse 2 here. I'll go ahead and read this. It says, "And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, At evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we, that you grumble against us? And Moses said, When the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him, what are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, Say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" Excuse me, for they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread that God has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather it, each one of you, as much as you can eat. You shall each take an omer, according to the number of persons that each of you has in his tent." And the people of Israel did so. They gathered some more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over till the morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted.
All right. Long reading.
Yes, it is.
Quite a bit of narrative that takes place there. I was one of the I was listening to Will Whedon as he talked about this issues, etc. Does a lectionary preparation. What's it called? Getting ready for Sunday morning or something along those lines. And so he was talking about this, and he said the way that Moses wrote this, he said, I wonder if he could have used an editor, because it is God's inspired word, but it's almost like he's tripping over himself in spots, especially in like verse 7 and 8. "For what are we that you grumble against us?" And you're grumbling against the Lord. And then again in verse 8 he says, "What are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord." It's almost like he's repeating himself, because he was making the point that he seems almost irate at this grumbling that's going on from the people.
Well, one of the things I read, I think it was Colby, Keob, Cobell. Basically, what his argument here is not so much that he's angry at them or that they're attacking him, but what he says they do, and they do this repeatedly, is they are rejecting his office as the one God chose to lead them. Mm-hmm. So it's not, because he says, "What are we?" Moses and Aaron and so forth. But what it is they're attacking the office through which God is exercising his will and his leadership for the people, and so forth. And it echoes what Jesus says: if they reject you, they actually are rejecting me, and so forth. And what Moses is trying to do is to emphasize that whatever he and Aaron are doing, it is purely the direction of God. They're not the ones doing all of this, and so forth. And
right.
I think because again, this is the first of the grumblings, and this time the Lord hears the grumbling and treats it mercifully, in the sense that he gets it and so forth. Because it's argued they're out of their supplies. They still have cattle and so forth, but some of the cattle they may use for sacrifice. But for the most part, the cattle were there more as an asset to build on, to trade with. They're working all of that along. So when they want water, it's for the sake of the livestock, to keep them alive. And now the bread issue comes, or nothing to eat. And the interesting thing, grumbled, is it's argued that it's not the best translation. It's referred to murmuring. And what I like about that, murmuring as opposed to grumbling, is murmuring. One of the wordsmiths had argued that it's not so much, it's kind of like, you may have had that, is somebody fusses a little bit to your face, but then when they're out of you and away from you, and they're maybe with somebody else, it's just full-blown complaining or whatever, you know what I mean? And what murmuring deals with is not so much just that you're out there complaining loudly, but that you're under your breath doing it too.
Yeah, like I see this when you're teaching. You probably see this when you're teaching, especially the students. Maybe not Bible study. We don't get a lot of murmuring, but when I get this morning we did a memory quiz, and as I'm getting ready to hand out the quiz, I walk in the room. They see the stack of papers, and there's immediately murmuring. Oh, we're gonna have a quiz, and
Right.
so I give them a minute, and they're murmuring as I remind them 30 seconds left to study, and all this. And I told them, I told them this morning. I said I should actually just grade you guys based on how loud you are when I come in. The louder you are, the worse you're going to do on this quiz. I know you have all week to study. So, but anyways,
the one thing I thought was interesting with this murmuring was the emphasis here that we tend to think God only deals with us according to what we actually say to people, and He's wholly ignorant of what's going on in our heart. And the one thing that He tied with that is the illusion that Ananias and Sapphira thought that is, all God would know is what He was telling them, the people. And this emphasis on murmuring is God hears it, and what He points to is then when the snakes actually come, when they get to the final grumbling that we hate this meat, we hate this bread, and so forth, then the serpents come in and they start biting people who maybe have never said a word, but God knows what's happening in their heart. You know what I mean? And it's an interesting searching for it. But the other thing too that is considered the worst part of it is two things: is the hyperbole or the exaggeration in verse 3, where it says, "Oh, that we would have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt." Okay. And instead of here, when we sat by meat pots and ate bread to the full. And two of the authors pointed out that in their condition in Israel, they rarely would have ever had meat of any kind. As slaves and those who are indentured. And what it is
they sat by the meat pots, though. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's the idea that they it's romanticizing the past. Oh, those were the glory days, and none of it is true.
Yeah.
But what they're doing with this is they're radically contrasting the benefits and the glory of slavery over against the abject poverty and lack in freedom, and so forth, and that the sole weapon they're accusing God of actually bringing them out here to kill them. And it's fascinating because they keep giving him reasons to, and he's not.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting, is just the illusion that they cast of it. It had to be better, and so forth, because it just never would have happened as such. But and then the idea of 1:4, and the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you." And this was an interesting thing that I'd never really put it together. But to rain it from heaven means that this is a gift directly from God to them. There is no farmer, there is no field, there is no mill. I mean, you know what I mean, to process and so forth.
Yeah.
There's no plowing. This is direct, and it does parallel to the Lord's Supper to a degree, in the sense of Christ giving himself directly to us.
Yeah, no, and that's I came across something like that too in one of the church father quotes I had, is that the Lord's provision of it literally removes all the effects of the curse of sin, where by the sweat of your brow you will eat. So there's literally no labor involved for the people other than gathering and eating. It's not the same as harvesting and processing and baking and all that goes into the bread making process before. This is not much sweat involved with scraping up some man off the ground.
Right. And I read one that said that because it was described, I think, in some of the translations, as like a coriander seed, it had to be ground to be able to use it for its different ways and so forth, that they could, use it or apply it and the like. But this idea from heaven, and you shall go out and gather a day's portion. And already the one alluded to the understanding. Here you see the first signs of daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread, and so forth. And the whole thing in giving it is to test them whether they will walk in my law or not. And this here is an interesting thing. It could be said laws plural, but it's law in a general, but they only have one thing to do here. He's not put it out to a multitude of things. Just go and get what you need for the day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not complicated or anything else. Yeah. So he's given them a simple test to see whether they will do. And to do it, they've got to trust that he'll be there tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And unlike the quail that was brought, the quail was brought to them for a limited time. Mm-hmm. Where until they crossed the Jordan, or just before they crossed the Jordan, the manna went with them everywhere they went, throughout the whole, if you get what I mean. The whole time they had this provision of the bread. Now, it was interesting, a couple of people seek to disprove this idea of manna, because there is an earthly thing they call manna that falls from the tamarisk trees, I think it is. And it's a honey-like substance and so forth. But the problem is like they point out, some have argued to try and quote-unquote debunk the miracle here. But the what falls from the trees, while it could be, it has this appearance and so forth, it's not sufficient in any form to feed this many people and so forth, and it's only located in certain areas. So it's kind of a debunking thing. The other thing, too, is that does not disappear when the sun comes out, mm-hmm. as this did, it would do, to provide what they need. And then the idea of providing for the rest on the Sabbath, to take twice as much and so forth. And the interesting, at evening you shall know that it is the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt. And it's an interesting thing. He ties the provision to deliverance. Mm-hmm. I didn't just deliver you. I delivered you to provide for you. Okay, it's not a secondary thought, and so forth. And I see a parallel between this and Jesus feeding the 5,000. Mm-hmm. Because what's interesting is when the people start coming, Jesus asks right away, where will we find food to feed so many?
Yeah.
So it isn't even dinner time, and Jesus is already thinking to get them thinking. What are they going to look to? And same thing here. Now we're out here, we don't have anything. They don't turn in prayer and ask God.
Right.
They just start grumbling about it. And it parallels similar to what the disciples are saying too. It's like, we don't got enough, And,
yeah.
And it's both of them are lack of confidences in God's good provision.
Yeah.
That God is already looking into the future to provide, and so forth. They're looking for him to provide according to their terms.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. There's in verse 6 it talks about, in evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord. And then in verse 8 it says, when the Lord gives you the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full. There's something I came across that suggested that maybe this is a connection to the creation account, where there was evening and there was morning, that pattern of evening and morning coming there. Do you think there's anything that can be said about the creation of the world and the creation of food here for the people, or maybe that's just making a stretch that doesn't need to be made?
I don't know that you could make that, but the thing that would happen in the evening is when the Lord would walk with Adam and Eve in the cool of the evening, okay? And Moses has them come out and watch this thing coming. Now, one of the things is that it literally meant that the cloud that had been there would have to go and gather these things, and it would come with the cloud. So it certainly could parallel the idea that the Lord was walking with them in the evening.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
If you if you think
A
about
little bit
that,
further. Whatever it is, it makes you think of that, and this is the creative act of God to do that. Yeah, it
bringing
is.
something out of nothing.
Yeah, there's always been people like you were saying that try to debunk this and saying whether I read something that said that it was like the secretions of the aphids that sometimes produces a manna-like substance.
Yep.
And but one of the point that was made right along with that is the way this story is told, it debunks that as an opportunity. And the same thing with the quail, that there's migrations of quail that
Right.
find themselves across the wilderness. But the way it's talked about, it only happens 6 days of the week, not the seventh day, and just happens so specifically as God orders here. It clarifies that this is a miraculous thing. It's not just a natural occurrence that the Israelites find themselves, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, look at that. That's been there the whole time. We didn't see that.
Right. And the interesting thing is to have the quail settle into the camp.
Mm-hmm.
No flock would ever do that. They
Right.
might come around to the side of it or something, but it's always the interesting debunking here and so forth. But the other thing he keeps driving is the Lord. He has heard your grumbling against the Lord. Okay, and this idea against Yahweh, the one who has revealed himself to you. And he just keeps hammering that because the Lord has heard your grumbling. He's heard your grumbling. Okay. And then Moses has Aaron say, and he says, come before the Lord, for he's heard your grumbling. Okay. And that's one of the things a couple of the authors emphasized is the two things that are critical here is we think the one is the raining of the bread down and the provisioning of the quail and so forth, but a thing that gets lost is God's hearing. That's a part of this account, is the things God does. God does hear.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, what does he hear? Does he hear a prayer, petition, a request? Does he, and like that's why I go to the collect that was there. Does he hear thanksgiving? Does he see obedience? Because clearly there's not petitions, there's just complaining or grumbling. There's not thanksgiving, there's or obedience. There's, well, I can't trust him, so and it all flows to that. But it's one of the things that is the, and again, the idea that I have heard your grumbling. If you like, I forget how many times he says that in here. Let's see if you think about so he says, 1, 2, 3, 4. At least 4 times it emphasizes he has heard your grumbling. And it's just one of the things that tends to get left out of God's raining this down and God's doing that. But I love the idea that in the collect it mentions that your mercies are new every morning, though we deserve only punishment. Mm-hmm. And nothing does he give them do they deserve, not just because of what they did in the past, but what they're doing right now, the grumbling. Right. And it's an interesting thing is the one author that I read I thought was interesting is this first grumbling could be part of what would be known as a lament psalm.
Right. Yeah. No, that is interesting. And I think it's incredible that he responds to their grumbling. And I think that's a good reminder along the lines of the lament songs of the Lord is the one who is able. And if you have a complaint, you can direct it to the Lord, and He will hear you and act according to His will for you, which is the best thing you can get.
Right.
So,
at this particular point, there is no, because it grows increasing in terms of as they grumble, each time it gets worse. The final grumbling round, bringing the poisonous snakes and so forth. But the other time is when they start loathing the quail and stuff like that, he gives it in more abundance because he says it's going to be coming out your eyes and your ears and so forth, your nostrils and the like. But this you can say it's grumbling. It is a lament and so forth. But one of the other things I heard with when Moses keeps saying, "Why are you telling us? It's the Lord," is one author said that what he's basically trying to tell him is, okay, if you're going to lament about this,
Go to the Lord.
go to the Lord.
Yep.
Go to the Lord, and so forth, because He will hear the lament psalm.
Right. No, that's a good thing to take from this. Other thing that I think is huge in here is further down, verse 16. Gather it, each of you, as much as he can eat. You shall each take an omer according to the number of persons. And the people of Israel did so. They gathered some more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, each of them had gathered as much as he could eat. Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over till morning." But they didn't listen to Moses. Some left part of it till morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. And I love this this picture here. It's a great picture of the sinful human nature of greed, not trusting the daily bread, the daily provision. And Chrysostom had a great quote that I'm going to share here on this. He said, "If anyone cannot endure what I have said, but still clings to the poverty of worldly things, snatching at the things which undergo diminution, let him call to mind the food of manna. Let him tremble at the example of that punishment. For what happened in that instance, the same result one may see now also in the case of covetous people. But what then happened to them? Worms were bred for their covetousness. This also happens now in our case. For the measure of the food is the same for all. You have one stomach to fill. Only you who feed luxuriously have more to get rid of. Those gathered in their homes more than the lawful quantity gathered not manna, but more worms and rottenness. Just so, both in luxury and in covetousness, the gluttonous and the drunken gather not more delicacy, but more corruption." I thought that's a pretty good way to put the strong law that's there is
Right.
The Lord provides you as much as you need. Don't gather to yourself more than is sufficient for you.
Well, and I love the line in 18. Whoever gathered little had no lack.
Yeah.
And each of them, notice, had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. And it's an interesting thing that this was given according to their need, not their appetite.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of the similar thing in the feeding that Jesus does.
Yeah.
Because the 200 denarii that he says to buy all these people, one of the authors looked into the kind of how much that would buy at the time. And basically, it would give each person what amounted to a half a slice of bread. Mm-hmm. You'd have a little something to eat, and so forth. And it was like, just an interesting thing that, they were trying to figure out how to get them at least a little something.
Right.
And here, when they're done, everybody ate to the full.
Right. Which is more than a half a slice of bread in my experience. So.
Yeah. And the other thing that's fascinating here, and it goes back to this murmuring idea, is that, God's listening to everything, is anybody could tell whose house stank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
You know what I mean? There was no hiding your lack of faith.
Right.
And I can only think of Moses when he wakes up in the morning and the smell. He already knows. You know what I'm saying? That
somebody did it.
Yeah. But
that made him angry.
Yeah, the worms and stank. The idea is corruption. Mm-hmm. Is that they had taken this gift and by their lack of faith corrupted it. And I always think of that in terms of the Lord's Supper. Whoever eats or drinks in an unworthy manner brings judgment or corruption
upon themselves,
and so forth. And that echoing. But 21 is a beautiful thing. It says, morning by morning they gathered it, and as much as he could eat, and so forth. The morning by morning, like you had mentioned, the mercies knew every morning. But it doesn't say the same thing about the quail. And the something I remember from reading a course on biblical times and so forth, I thought it was interesting that as a rule, when people ate, and I had the cool experience of eating in a Bedouin tent, of having a meal with them when we were there. We arranged, Dr. Bullhagen had arranged us to be able to go out, and they invited us in for the meal and so forth, and you sit around. And what was fascinating is they would take a piece of meat, not a large one, but it would basically be marinating all day in juices and stuff like that. And then they would bring it and put it in a pot, and then they would take some of the flour and basically make it, the meat was pretty much mashed up, but they would make it a gravy. And what we did and set around was you had the flavor of meat, but you took bread and you tore it. And so even if they had meat, the vast majority of what they would eat would be the bread, would be would fill the palate and so forth, not the meat. But it's an interesting, and that was the other thing too. Is one author said that quail was considered one of the finest meats to eat for anyone who was out in the wilderness. I don't know that factors or whatever, but
we have quail at our house. We have a handful of quail. We got them for their eggs. They're not big birds.
No, they're not.
they're maybe the size of a large baked potato.
See, and that's what makes me think of them. They call flesh pots. You put that thing in and boil that thing to death, or whatever. But I just can't imagine, as tiny as they are, defeathering them.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, one other question. This might be putting you on the spot here, but Numbers chapter 11 talks about the manna and the quail. Do you think that's a same telling of this same instance? Have you come across that, or do you remember in your studies? Is it a parallel telling of the same account, or is it another account? Because so much of it seems similar. It starts off with the calling of the 70 elders, and there's the people complaining there, but it's I always like that part of it though, because in verse 19, Numbers 11 verse 19, you shall not eat just 1 day or 2 days or 5 days or 10 days or 20 days, but a whole month until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you.
This one, from what I read, this is the second round of grumbling.
Okay.
Because if you look back into it and so forth, it is, the first grumbling was before there were any of the elders appointed.
Yeah.
This is shortly after they're out across the Red Sea. They're going out. They've sent the spies up. Nothing came of it. Now they got to go on their own. So they got to learn to live by faith. This would be, the one author I said, this would be considered the second grumbling, is where he threatens to have it come out of their nostrils and stuff like that, and so forth. And this one carries a little bit more of a burden and so forth, and the like. And Moses here says this. I like in I love this line. He says, 13, where am I to get meat to give all this people? For they weep after me and say, give us meat that we may eat. And again, it's almost like Moses has lost or forgotten what kind of, and he says, I am not able to carry this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once. If I have found favor in your sight, that I may not see my wretchedness. And it's interesting because the Lord comes, is my hand so short, that I can't, because he says this and the Lord said to Moses, verse 23, he says, is the Lord's hand shortened? Now you will see whether my word will come true for you or not.
Yeah.
Because at this particular point, they were getting the manna.
Yeah, that in verse 6 it says, but now our strength is dried up, and there's nothing at all but this manna to look at. So yeah, that kind of clears it up, that this is after the manna had already been instituted. Maybe the quail, I don't know, it's interesting to look at these passages and to think about how they were written, and some of them overlap a little bit, but not always.
And the one thing that was what it's pointed out is that he didn't provide the quail continuously. He did for a season.
But then he gives it for a whole month a year at this point. So it's coming out of your nostrils. So
yeah. And that's that's that. But now this, I set it out of sequence. The spies are set up into Cana after this this complaint and so forth. So this is prior to them sending the spies in.
Yeah.
And so forth. I was wrong in that particular, but
That's all right. It's a lot to keep track of.
yeah. So well, let's head to John's Gospel, chapter 6. Again, John tells it a little different than the other authors do, which tends to point to two things. Number one, the Holy Spirit having him emphasize certain points, but also a true and faithful accounting of the same thing will have distinct differences from one witness to another. If they are all in a line with each other, even today the police would attribute it to a false story. So, yeah, chapter 6, we're taken through verse 15. And
Can you read that for us?
Sure.
All right, let's see here. All right. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him, because they saw the signs he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then and seeing a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we going to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." Perceiving them then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Yeah. At risk of besmirching our Lord, this is like a hold my beer moment for the Lord. This is what are they going to do? How are we going to do something with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish? And Jesus says, hold my beer. Or he says, have the people sit down. But this is basically watch and see. And I think that's what's going on here. It's like, watch what I can do.
Yeah. The thing here is that he crosses to the other side, and the other side would put him. It's said is on the northeast side of the Sea of Galilee, or I think the Greek says which is called Tiberias, but he was up on the northeast side of the on the east side of the Jordan is where he's gone. It's a little quieter. It's not a place that people come to. And what's striking here is the large crowd followed him because they had seen the signs. They didn't recognize they were signs, but they saw him doing things. And what's interesting is the flow of people. Mm-hmm. It's the time of the Passover, and they ought to be flowing south-southwest toward Jerusalem. And yet they're flowing north-northeast to him. And it's the first echoings of that if we let this man keep going, we will lose our place in our nation, because they are falling away from us and following him, and so forth. And what's fascinating here is it's a little bit of a window into the reality that Jesus is concerned body and soul here. Mm-hmm. Because he is concerned about, well, are they going to have food? Yeah, I can teach them all day and stuff like that, but we want to make sure that they're physically fed too, And it's an interesting thing that he asks Philip this, and I don't know that Philip is the one that necessarily gets singled out, or it could be, but by asking Philip, John doesn't report it here, but as the crowd comes, Jesus teaches them for a while, and so forth. And in Jesus posing the question to Philip, he's actually posing it to the 12.
Yeah.
They're supposed to come up with a solution. And the most they can come back with is, Andrew, who basically says, well, there's a boy here with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and so forth. But what are they among so many? And the operative word is nothing. I love that.
Yeah.
Nothing. Okay? And they know that. It's a rhetorical question. It's nothing. Okay? And that's your Jesus moment where he's starting to hold my beer. That's the kind of thing I work with.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I work out of nothing.
And I work with nothing. Yeah, yep. And it's the whole reversal idea of why Jesus takes the little, or favors the little, the least, the not, and everything else, and just completely flips the script on it over and over again. And here it's the same thing happening in the Old Testament lesson.
Mm-hmm.
This is where God always works, is where there's nothing. And the thing of it is because we can't do that, we can't imagine He can.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a glorious thing. But and the most critical thing that I loved, one author talked about this, when it says have the people sit down, is and then what some of the authors say, having groups of 50 or however they did it or whatever. You got to imagine the disciples are like, I just don't get this.
Mm-hmm.
Why? They need to move on. They got to get to something. Why? What? Sit down? You do that to eat? Yeah, that's what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, I just did a quick little rabbit trail down Philip, because so Philip, just real quickly, in 1 verse 43 of John, Philip is called, and Philip goes and gets Nathanael, and Philip said to, Nathanael says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? And Philip says, come and see. And so now here in John chapter 6, Philip shows up again, and Jesus asks him, where are we going to buy bread so that all these people can eat? And you can, obviously, the way the story unfolds, we know that's a teaching question, that Jesus is testing him. It says there, he said this to test him. But then in John 14 verse 8, Philip says to Jesus, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long that you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? And I mean, probably a lot more that could be said about it, but I just think it's interesting. Philip's first words about Jesus to Nathanael were, come and see. And now Jesus is inviting him intellectually to a front row seat, because he's asked him this question, how are we gonna buy them food? And so Philip, just by that question alone, you see that Philip's more invested in what's going to happen here, seeing what Jesus does, and then later on he's like, just show us the Father. And so it's kind of this interesting difficulty of seeing they do not understand, and thinking they get it, they don't, and
he thinks seeing will be enough. The cool thing Jesus does here in this question is, notice that he says, where are you going to buy? But where are we? And is Philip's question is the we, okay? And, Jesus says to Philip, where are we? Excuse me, which is an automatic informing Philip that Jesus is involved in what they're going to need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And yet Philip does not consider Jesus to be an asset sufficient to the need.
Mm-hmm.
The fountain out of which they might meet that need, and so forth. But the mere fact Jesus includes himself in it, and so forth, is I've called you to this. What I've called you to, I'm involved in.
Right.
And will you look to me for that, and so forth. The have the people sit down and so forth. About 5,000 in number, and Jesus took the loaves. Now I don't know. Authors argued that the loaves would be more about 2 or 3 inches high, and maybe not quite a foot long. because that's more of what it was, that kind of bread. You wouldn't have some big honking loaf because you had to keep it in a bag or something. I don't know how that goes, but the whole idea is that whatever was in Jesus' hands, he just kept breaking it, and it was sufficient. And
Yeah, you got to wonder what that looked like. Did they
yes.
know as it was happening, or was it once everything was done? It's like, what happened here? It's just incredible to think that something from nothing, and that's like with the manna and the quail, people come up with this just increased the generosity of the people by seeing Jesus share the little boy's meal, so everybody else pulled out what they had, and that's where the true miracle is found in the sharing hearts. And no, this is the God who created the heavens and the earth, showing us what He can do with His creation, yeah, to have been there, what a crazy thing to have seen. But yeah, I love that kind of point on that tangent I went with Philip. Is it's not about seeing that gives us faith to believe. And,
right. Yeah. And the one thing that I thought was interesting in some reading was where when it's done, it says Jesus says, gather up leftover fragments that nothing may be lost. And one of the things that an author pointed out here is Jesus is emphasizing, do not treat the gift of God contemptuously. To leave it just left on the ground or throwing it away and so forth, it points to, because this is, of course, he's pointing to the spiritual nourishment we need. Okay? And so one of the things they talked about is, how do we treat the means of grace? Do we treasure it up? Do we come and take as much as we need to the full, and so forth and the like? Or do we just let it be gotten rid of or whatever? And I just thought it was an interesting thing, is that you cannot, these gifts that God gives you cannot treat them with that kind of an indifference, and so forth, that nothing may be lost. And
yeah, so this isn't just Jesus encouraging leftovers, storing of leftovers. After, don't throw it away. It's not just a stewardship thing. For me, I think it's I think a lot of John points you to more than just the surface reading, and I think this is God's heart for people as well. As He doesn't desire that any should be lost, and so the bread is.
Yeah, and the mere fact that John and the others, even Jesus, will use that, he points to the signs. It's emphasizing the sign. These miracles are signs. They're pointing to something else, a lack that only Jesus could meet and did meet. And here they've been watching that go on along, and here they are standing here with, again, a lack. They acknowledge they can't meet it, but they don't have the first thought of asking Jesus. And it echoes again that what's happening in the wilderness. They have a lack, they can't meet it, but they don't even think about asking God to meet it. They just start complaining to Moses and Aaron and so forth. And what I love is just that emphasis on, it's in the lack is the place God lives, to the point that there's an abundance.
Right.
And the like. And I just, that idea of nothing may be lost, I always think of that this is to be used. This is to be used for the purpose it was given, but yeah, one author I was reading went off on this tangent about the stewardship of leftovers. How much we're a throwaway society, blah 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 blah. And he goes, and on and on and on. It's like, okay, I get that, but I don't think that's where he's going here.
Right.
But and then Jesus, of course, considering that he is about to force him to be king, be quote unquote a bread king. One of the things that I thought was interesting is one author emphasized that Jesus could see them carrying him in, not on a donkey, but right into Jerusalem at the Passover. Again, Hail Hosanna, the king and stuff like that. But it would be a king, again, because they got their belly full.
Yeah.
And
and it's interesting too, because it would have probably ended it the same way. He would have been killed, but we would have lost all the prophetic fulfillment of riding in on a donkey. Behold, your king comes to you,
Right.
and
it would not have had the signs
yeah,
that
that's
verified
interesting.
who he was.
I never thought about that. They could have carried him into Jerusalem in a completely different type of parade, and it would have ended the same way in his death. But yeah,
Yeah. And see the key thing, it would have been critical because at that moment that would have fit Philip's vision.
Hey, watch this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Watch and see.
Yeah, and so he withdraws to the mountain and so forth, and it's interesting. It's almost like he does when they want to take his life, is he hides himself, or he doesn't allow himself to be seen, and slips away out of their sight and out of their grasp in earthly terms. But
no, good stuff here. It's there's a lot to choose from. I'm not sure where I'm going with my sermon. Where are you gonna stick head for on yours?
I just think I think these emphasizing, faith in your lack. Faith in the midst of lacking, faith in the midst of nothing, because that's. I just go back to what Dr. Nagel taught in one of my STM classes at St. Louis, is where he was trying to emphasize. We were studying Luther on the understanding of faith, how he understood faith and grace, and wherever you have the word faith, Luther always understood you could put Jesus. If you have faith, you have Jesus. If you have Jesus, you have faith. And it's interesting is if I have faith in my lacking, it's I have Jesus in my lack.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand Jesus is in your lack? And even out in the wilderness, again, they're grumbling against the Lord, the Yahweh, which points to Christ himself and so forth. And it's like he's showing that he is in your lack. And he's in your lack in a way that you could never meet it.
Right.
And he's not just there once and gone, he's there every day and so forth, because we run into that lack, you know what I mean, every day.
Yep.
But only this last one I always love is one author I'd read said, to take him and force him to be king would be that he would be the one that would give you the winning lottery ticket. He would be the one, you know what I mean, that it'd be just different ways that, you're wanting him to be king. Well, you made the bread, what's making $1 million, or
Right. Well, and that ties back to the gathering and holding over too much of the manna. It's this desire to accumulate more, and
right.
what good is this accumulation for you? Well, it's nothing. It stinks. It grows worms, and that's often what our worldly desires drive us to the opposite of what God would have us have, which is a dependence or reliance on Him. And I think, kind of just to riff on what you're saying a little bit, our lack, which shows up so often, it's a very visceral and tangible experiential reality of what's unfelt and unseen, unavailable to us, but revealed by Scripture, is that we have nothing good apart from God. And so it's only when it shows up, oftentimes only when it shows up in our empty stomach or empty wallets or whatever it might be, where we're like, God, I need you. And he's like, yeah, I know you do. You need me all along the way.
Yeah. And two things to pick up on what you said. Everybody had to go out and get their own manna. And what's funny is the word manna is literally in Hebrew the question, what is this? Because that's what they were asking. What is this? And that was the name that was given to it, that God chose. The mere fact of what is it is because you don't know what it is. Why? Because it's not from you, it's from God. And it's just it's interesting how the Lord kind of, and that's always what he does. He takes what we're left with, and that's the thing he works with. Because man was left with nothing but his flesh to the dust when he sinned, and God uses that very thing to come back and defeat Satan, who returned him to it. He's always using what we have left over from our sin and flipping that. But Well, let's see. This week we have midweek services. Pastor Kleimola will be preaching on that 4:30 and 7 o'clock on Wednesdays. We have another soup supper where we have two more midweek Wednesdays in Lent,
And then we're in Holy Week.
yes, on the way for that. So, but I don't know of any other announcements. Do you?
No.
Oh, make sure that if you have not, please register or call the office to find out how to register for pictures to be taken for the new pictorial directory. That they're going to be taking pictures very, very soon here, coming up into Holy Week. And again, be mindful. It's not. There's no sales pitch or anything else, because we have Beth Harrington is going to be doing our photography and so forth. It's not about buying packages, but we'd love to have you be a part, so you're a part of the picture, so we get to see the body of Christ. But I'm sure if you'd like a copy of it, Beth would be glad to help
packages will be available, but it's
Right.
not a salesy thing. This is for our directory. So
Yep, absolutely. With that, God's blessings on your day and your week.
God be with you.